Awesome. So, John Harvey is the Hal Wright Professor of Economics at Texas Christian University. His research focuses on exchange rates, macroeconomics, business cycles, and contemporary economic schools of thought. John, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you for doing stuff like this. It's a real public service.
So, to start, I'd love to just ask you about kind of the frameworks around macroeconomics that you use, thinking about both theory and how things actually play out in reality, specifically around employment and inflation.
Yeah, no, I think that a lot of the discussions of economic and social issues that you see in the media lack a framework of, oh, by the way, here's how the economy works. It'd be like if you were reading articles on how to maintain your car, but there's no concept of an internal combustion engine. It's like, what has the engine? Why do I need to change the oil? This is how the engine works, kind of things that I like to talk about first to kind of set the stage and the framework for the deeper discussions that you would mention in your email that you'd like to get into. And the first thing that I think is most important to understand is that the private sector cannot be expected to automatically create a job for every willing worker. In fact, the private sector tries to minimize the use of labor, right? And so, you see the Republicans and Democrats both trying to rely on the private sector to stimulate the macroeconomy. By coincidence, like say during the 1990s when we had all the technological breakthroughs and the computerization of so many firms, that worked there. But in general, the private sector is going to try to minimize the use of labor. And on top of that, is the fact that, well, this is not like they're bad people. I don't know if you remember this or not, but after the financial crisis, when firms' profits started going up, I had some of my left-leaning friends say, well, firms should be using these profits to hire workers. Why should they? There is no incentive for that to happen. Their incentive structure, if we have plenty of competition, which we don't anymore, but let's pretend we do. If we have plenty of competition, then firms minimizing the use of labor is a good thing for all of us because it lowers costs. All right. So we should not expect markets to generate a sufficient number of jobs other than by coincidence. We should expect markets to try to keep prices low and quality high because of the competition. All right. So that's the first thing. Private sector is not going to be the source of full employment. Now, the second thing that I think is really important to bear in mind is that the private sector is only going to do things that are profitable, not necessarily things that are socially useful. Now, many times profitable and socially useful overlap. Restaurants are certainly very socially useful, and they're also profitable. So that's great. But we should be very sensitive to situations where there's something that's terribly socially useful, but it's not very profitable. Like national defense is not profitable. We couldn't, say, well, it must be very profitable for the General Dynamics and so forth. No, that's from tax money. General Dynamics is not going door to door trying to convince you to buy, the latest fighter in the same way that Ford is trying to get you to buy, their latest vehicle. So the national defense depends on it is very socially useful in our opinion, but it's not profitable. So the government has to do it. Educating poor people is not very profitable by definition. Healthcare, which is done horribly in our country, of course, is not very profitable unless, I should say, providing healthcare to those who can't afford the insurance is not very profitable. And the big one on top of everything else, climate change, is not in any way profitable. Addressing climate change is costly. And so that's why we're not doing it. That's why we're not doing it. So it is not cost effective to save the planet. So we need to bear in mind the private sector is not going to create a job for everybody that wants one. It's only going to do things that are profitable. And so anything that is, potentially socially useful but not profitable, these are the rules for the government. All right, these are the rules for the government. The government should do unprofitable social problems. They should address those, and they should try to maintain full employment. All right, so that's kind of my macro structure there to think about the issues you had raised in your email. The last thing I want to mention is inflation is so poorly understood. And it's not the fault of the general public. If you take one intro econ class, they're going to say something about printing money, which is the most ridiculous theory. If you break it down, the idea that printing money causes inflation falls apart very quickly, right? So inflation is very complicated. Inflation we show in the news as one number, but it's not one number. It's a weighted average of all kinds of different numbers. And For example, during the inflationary episode that we experienced after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there were some prices that were rising faster than inflation. You know, inflation was around what, 8 or 9%. There were some that were rising faster than that. There were some that were rising but slower than that, and there were some that were falling. So how are you going to understand that? You're not going to understand with one number. You're going to break it down and see exactly where is it that the big numbers are coming from, that the acceleration is coming from. Oh, okay, it's oil and food, which is what it was after the Russians invaded Ukraine. Well, gee, I wonder, what's causing that? Oh, yeah, Russia invaded. And so that's what's causing those prices to go up so much. So let's see, what should we do about that? Raise U.S. interest rates? No, that's ridiculous. It's not going to solve a shortage. You can't solve a shortage with federal government policy. All right, you can help to address it over the long run, but it's going to be long run. Like right now with eggs, we're trying to figure out how to get rid of the bird flu. Or during COVID, I decided to get a 3D printer during COVID and for something to do. And I love military history, so I was making little tanks and planes, that sort of thing. But you needed rubbing alcohol to clean the equipment. Oh my gosh, the price skyrocketed because I don't know if you remember, but early in COVID, we didn't know whether or not surface areas were important. Turned out they weren't, but we didn't know. And so the price had skyrocketed. Well, what happened? Well, the government worked to try to lower these prices by shifting resources into vaccines, into things that were going to help clean up the potential infections and so forth. So they could address it, but it's a long-term thing. So whenever you talk about inflation, you have to break it down and talk about the individual factors that are causing the problems. You can't just say, oh, inflation is going up. Sounds like that's Biden's fault, or it sounds like that's Trump's fault, and what we need are higher interest rates. That never works. I have more I can say about that, but I'll stop right there as that being my sort of introduction to sort of some concepts in macroeconomics that are useful in explaining some of the deeper issues.
So I'd love to ask you more about both the employment and inflation and the role of different sectors. But just kind of talking about the notion of the things that are actually happening. Um, I wanted to ask you, like, what do you think about applying system dynamics models in economics, and how do you kind of visualize some of these problems and know when inflation is being caused by one thing versus another in this sector versus that sector?
Yeah, that raises a lot of questions. I implied in there that a lot of this stuff is poorly understood, and I would, and this is going to make me sound like the person on the street corner with the sign that's holding up, the world is ending. But mainstream economics has done a very poor job of explaining macroeconomics. Right? And I'll link this eventually back to system dynamics. In fact, such a bad job that a recent Nobel Prize winner, Paul Romer, who is a neoclassical economist himself, wrote an article in which he said it's not even scientific research anymore, the way they are doing macroeconomic analysis. And that he says it's kind of a funny article. He said we have ended up sort of implying that macroeconomic fluctuations are caused by like fairies and these things we can't put our finger on, but it's something weird out there. Not people, not people. All right. It is people. All right. It is people. Economics is just the study of human behavior in a particular context. All right. So he writes this article about how poorly macroeconomics is being done by neoclassical, by mainstream economics. And I happened to be on a panel with him before he got the Nobel Prize. I like to think I put him over the top. Oh, he was on a panel with John Harvey. And he said, he caught so much grief for that article. He said, but not because people disagreed with his argument, but because they said, how dare you say something like that? How dare you say something bad about Milton Friedman? And he's like, that's not what we're supposed to be doing, is it? So there's that. There's also the fact that macroeconomics in mainstream economics, in the main schools, is becoming increasingly unpopular to graduate students. They find that it's just not very interesting or useful, to the point that there are some top institutions considering no longer requiring their PhD students to take macroeconomics at all. I was like, well, what the hell? So somebody's going to get a PhD in economics and doesn't know about unemployment, inflation, GDP growth, interest rates, all the things that are relevant to macroeconomics. Now, I don't know if that was followed through or not. This is from an article several years ago where it was being considered. But that should be a core course. So that's how poorly, even in their own opinion, it's being done. All right. So what's wrong with it? Well, all kinds of stuff. I have a couple of articles written on that, but I'm going to boil it down to one thing right now, and it's going to go right to the system dynamic stuff. The tool of preference of neoclassical economics in looking at macro issues is the general equilibrium analysis, which, if anyone's had an intro econ class, supply and demand. All right. What is that really? It's the equation of two lines. All right. And then you set those two, you set you want to find out what the intersection is, right? So you want to find out which price and quantity will solve that. So you have two equations, two unknowns, you can solve that system. All right. So now imagine that with 35 equations and 35 unknowns. I mean, so this is what you get with more complicated models. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. I mean, my first major was physics. I loved math. I've written a couple of recent papers where I have lots and lots of equations. But you know what you can't do with these general equilibrium models? You can't model the passage of time. And this is one of those things that when you first hear it, it sounds kind of really esoteric, but it's actually quite practical. Okay. All right. So here's one set of intersections, and then here's another set. I've shifted this line here. Which one came first? Well, there's no way to say. It's just two equations. There's no way to think about the passage of time, all right, in general equilibrium analysis, which is why, and people listening are going to think I'm lying about this because it sounds so ridiculous, which is why financial sectors are often left out of mainstream macro models, because the financial sector is all about time. I want to borrow money today and repay over time. I want to loan money today and repay over time. We're going to have stocks and flows. We're going to have stocks of how much total I owe, and then I repay. These can't be modeled. It is simply not possible to model the passage of time. Now, what they do, they have this what they call dynamic. I can't remember the name of it now. And they say, well, we're modeling time. Well, no, you're not. You're just making up a story about what happened to get to here. You know what does model time? System dynamics. System dynamics modeling is inherently about the passage of time and about the accumulation of stocks, about flows. And so I will tell you, I have an article under review right now where I'm arguing that we should be, in my school of thought, in Post Keynesian institutional economics, we should be making even greater use of system dynamics. There have been some excellent publications on this. A fellow named Mark Lavoie, along with Wynne Godley, did a massive book. And they didn't call it system dynamics, but it was. It was computer simulation across time. So I guess to sort of boil down to a very clear response to your comment, system dynamics will allow us to model the macroeconomy properly, but no one in mainstream economics uses it. They use the general equilibrium stuff. And so in my school of thought, do people always model that way? No, they don't. But they always have in the back of their mind that this is, even when they use graphs like this, they're like, well, we're comparing two situations. We're not really thinking about the passage of time, and we're going to have to model that a different way. And system dynamics is an awesome way to do that. And like I said, I have an article out right now under review where I'm arguing that, why didn't we pick up on this more? Why haven't we used this more? I don't think people are opposed to it. I think it's really complicated. And so, yeah, the article itself is actually also a tutorial. I was like, hey, if you follow along in these pages here with me, then in an hour, you'll have a very basic model done. You'll have it. It's a business cycle model. So it's a macro thing, which, by the way, you can't do in general equilibrium. There is no again, I sound like a liar. What's her name? Christina Romer. No relation to the Paul Romer I mentioned before. She was Barack Obama's chair of the Council of Economic Advisors. She has an encyclopedia entry online on business cycles that I have quoted over and over and over, and not in a good way, where she says, well, really, there's not a business cycle, that the economy could stay at full employment forever if it weren't for stuff like COVID. She doesn't say stuff like COVID, but that's what she's implying. So in their mind, the private sector does take care of employment, and it generates full employment. This is from a left-leaning economist. This is not even from somebody in the Bush administration. It was Obama. So they say there isn't one. We say there is, and system dynamics is a wonderful way of modeling that, but it's not taken off the way I hoped it would. So like I said, the article I have under review right now is sort of a call for why aren't we doing this? And hey, if you'll sit with me for an hour here, you'll have your own business cycle model. That's not a great model, but I just trying to introduce people to the concepts.
So there are a few things you mentioned that I want to follow up on. The first is the notion of time being included in some of these models, and thinking about what you said about inflation and how there's multiple causes, and um, just in thinking about what influences prices going up, particularly over time. How should we think about moments where we need uh, I think you kind of started to refute this earlier, like when we need more fiscal stimulus or we need some sort of monetary stimulus, how do we think about inflation during those times when, perhaps the federal government's injecting a lot of money into the system in different ways, and it's affecting different sectors differently. At the same time, when, like you mentioned, like energy and food, there are effects on the supply chain from a shock of some other kind. So all these different things are happening. How do we think about trying to stabilize prices or be okay with prices going up for certain causes versus others?
Right, right, right. No, I have a book forthcoming on business cycles, and uh, one of the longest sections ended up being just on inflation, even though the book's not really about that. I mean, not directly at any rate, because it's so complicated. I can't remember. I think I ended up with like seven different unique ways inflation can occur, and each one suggests a different approach. And so let me say a couple of things at the outset here that I probably should have said earlier. I didn't think about it. And that was, first of all, every time you pay more, somebody is getting more. All right, so inflation is not a zero-sum game necessarily. Somebody's getting more. So inflation can be understood as a redistribution of income. Somebody is almost always getting better off. Not always, and I'll give you some examples, but someone's almost always getting better off and somebody worse off. Whereas the way we talk about inflation, we talk about it as if everyone's worse off. Well, that's impossible. I mean, the huge example of inflation in post-World War II economy was the 1973 Arab oil embargo after the Arab-Israeli War that went on for about a decade. Now, people who were paying for fuel certainly paid one hell of a lot more for it than they had before, and so everyone was worse off. Absolutely not. The oil exporting countries are getting wealthier and wealthier. If I'm an executive at Exxon, I'm not terribly upset about all this. All right, so you have to think about, and that's one of the things I say in the book. I say, okay, when you're thinking about a particular episode of inflation, where is it really centered? All right. So what I referred to earlier, like with well, let's continue with the Arab-Israeli war and OPEC. Where is it centered? Oil. Okay. Are there spillover effects? Oh my God, yes, all kinds of them with energy, because almost everything requires energy to be produced. And so, farm products are going to be more expensive. We got to ship them from the farm to the grocery store and so forth. So lots of spillover effects. Uh, how has it affected the distribution of income? Well, oil importing countries and people who aren't in the oil industry are getting a lot worse off. Those who are exporting and who are in the industry are getting a lot better off. In fact, I think I show some numbers in the book about, oh, I don't know, overall inflation in, I'll make up a year here, I don't remember anymore, 1975 being like, 10%, but oil prices have gone up by 20%. So, hey, if I'm in that industry, now, am I complaining about the 10%? Yes, because I'm not thinking about the fact that, well, actually, I'm causing the 10%. All right. So it's not, that doesn't occur to me. So everyone's complaining. All right. So now, how do we address that? Well, there's often, I'm going to give you an exception here in a minute, but there's often no short-term solution to a shortage. What we ended up doing over the course of that next decade was, as the prices went up, firms shifted to other methods. As much as possible, they used less oil. Also, it became cost effective to search for oil that we always knew was there, but it was just too expensive to pump out of the ground. And then two countries went to war with each other. I can't remember if it was 1979 or 1980. Iran and Iraq. Iraq invades Iran because Iran had just had the Iranian Revolution, And Saddam Hussein is thinking, oh, I'm gonna walk into this country and it's just gonna fall apart. All right. So because they're already fighting each other and so forth. Well, the invasion of Iran turns out to be more like the movie Independence Day, where all of a sudden all the earthlings come together. Well, that's what happened to the Iranians. They're like, well, hey, man, these Iraqis are screwing with us. Let's all get together and fight back. So we end up with this long war between the two of them, very expensive, and and they start cheating on the limitations that OPEC had put on production of oil because they needed more money. Well, then everyone else is like, well, hell, if they're going to cheat, I'm cheating too, right? So all these things came into play to eventually bring the price of oil way back down. And it didn't just stop accelerating; the price actually fell. How much of this was because the U.S. increased interest rates in the 1980s? Absolutely none of it. There was no way, when you think about the specific causes of a period of inflation, raising interest rates, and I say this in the book, like every section on inflation, I said, well, how would raising interest rates have helped? Oh, that's right, not at all. The only time, and you alluded to this, let's do a different kind of inflation. Let's do the U.S. in World War II, and we are at less than 2% unemployment. And we are limiting the supply of consumer goods because we're using the resources for tanks and planes and so forth. And so we're having to do rationing. We're having to raise taxes. We are having to have a bond program to get people not to spend their money. This was inflation. It was very inflationary. All right, this period, and in this case, it wasn't really. It was because everyone had so much money and they wanted to go out and buy stuff. Okay, there's inflation that's caused by rising demand, and there's inflation that's caused by falling supply. OPEC is falling supply. Russian invasion of Ukraine is falling supply. Rising demand, we really have very few instances in economic history where that was a big deal, but it was in World War II. So how do you stop rising demand? You lower demand. And so they raised taxes. The whole bond program in World War II had next to nothing to do with paying for the war, right? Because the U.S. has its own money. The reason for the bond program, and if you read contemporary accounts, they talk about this, was to stop inflation. They want John Harvey coming home from the factory with all this money, and maybe I'll go to the black market and buy some more gas or milk or whatever. They want me to instead think that my patriotic duty is to put this money into a bond and not spend it. And the other thing that accomplished was, I'm in the middle of a really good military history book right now, and he brought this up there. I was surprised because people don't often know about this. When World War I ended, there was a recession because the economy contracted. They were worried about the same thing in World War II, except that all these Liberty bonds are going to mature then. So all of a sudden, even though the government has cut back on building aircraft carriers, all of a sudden, I've got this new money that's coming in from these bonds. I can go buy that power tool that I used to use at the factory and so forth. So the only kind of inflation that is really directly affected by interest rates, and they shouldn't use interest rates, they should use taxes, but taxes are not politically palatable, is demand pull. But now think about, and I'll stop here in a second. Think about this too, though. When demand goes up and it drives up the price of, I don't know, coffee mugs, all right? Why should we stop that? Why shouldn't we allow the prices in the coffee mug sector to go up to induce more entrepreneurs to come into that sector and make coffee mugs? So the only kind of inflation that raising interest rates makes sense a little bit as a solution for is rising demand. But rising demand is a good kind of inflation. It's going to redistribute income to the people who are selling goods and services that people want, and good for them. That's how the system is supposed to work. And then they will make more of those goods and services. But raising interest rates, and it was interesting to see this after the Russian invasion, they were talking to Jerome Powell, and both parties were saying, how does this help? How does raising interest rates help us with these shortages of grain and fuel? And he really didn't have an answer, and they did it anyway. So anyway, I'll shut up there. But there's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, well, you mentioned one of the things that I wanted to ask you about. You mentioned, I think it was, you were saying either during World War II or post World War II, there was a 2% unemployment rate. And I wanted to ask you about frictional unemployment and both looking backwards and thinking about it through history, but also thinking about the future of frictional unemployment, thinking about things like AI and automation that I would think would be likely to increase kind of our our frictional unemployment and kind of the year to year expectations around employment levels. How do
Right.
you think about addressing that or becoming more accustomed to that? And what can we do to kind of reframe that thinking?
Well, and reframe is exactly what I want to do right now. Because let's think about the household, all right? And before the innovation of the dishwasher, then that was a lot of work, or the washer and dryer. That was a ton of work. And when we added a dishwasher and a washer and dryer to the household economy, that didn't cause unemployment. Their lives weren't worse off because of that. They were actually able to enjoy more leisure time. And the key difference is whether or not you're allowed to have a plate at the dinner table is because you're a member of our family, not because you did all the laundry done at the creek today. All right. Within the confines of the household, increasing technology, increasing productivity, actually is a boon. It's a wonderful thing. We get more leisure time, right? That's not true in the rest of the macroeconomy because as we come up with, and I love self-checkout lanes. I'm basically an introvert. I put my earphones in. I'm walking around Target or and buying. I don't want to talk to anybody. All right, so I get to the self-checkout lane, and then, and then some of my friends online, they say, oh, well, you're putting somebody out of work. Well, so is the computer at the bank. So only banks that use an abacus, that hire, thousands of people to do that's stupid. If we have an economic system that punishes us for increasing productivity, we have the wrong economic system. All right. So that's the first thing, is that you're absolutely right. That the, I mean, the ability to go to the self-checkout lane, to check yourself in at the airport, there's so many things are made easier, and we should all be celebrating it in the same way we celebrate the washer and the dryer and the dishwasher in the home. But we can't because we depend on those incomes. When they lay off the people who had been at Target checking people out, and you know how it is nowadays, there might be one or two person lanes open, and then they have the one person watching all of the 10 self-checkouts. Somebody got laid off, and we should be okay with that. But our system makes us not okay with it because it means, oh, well, now you've just lowered the income of some individual who, even though we can produce even more than we could the day before, we could actually do more with robots that are making cars, but we can actually have fewer people that can afford them. All right. So this is a problem within the macroeconomy that is only going to get worse. And in my school of thought, in post Keynesian economics and institutionalism, a very popular solution is not the UBI because they see a lot of problems with that. They think it's very inflationary and the money tends to go into profits. But instead of job guarantee, that if you get laid off at Walmart, then you look around for another job for a while. We expect you to, because the idea of a job program is to supplement the private sector, not to replace the private sector. It shouldn't do anything profitable. We shouldn't be opening up hamburger stands from the government. Well, we already got those, right? So we don't need that. But it would go back to that list of things that are socially beneficial, but are not profitable. We are about to have a terrible, I'll be contributing to it, elder care crisis. We're going to have lots of retiring people, and we need lots of people to help these folks. And it's already basically the elder care industry is already driven by government money. I can't remember what the percentage is. I talk about it in my book. But anyway, or after school care, or how about lowering the ratio of students to teachers? Wait, do I want to lower that? Lower the ratio of students to teachers. There's all these things that we can do, and climate change. I mean, we could be using the people that get laid off at Target in addressing social problems. I said, what will we do when we run out of social problems? I don't know, have a party? I mean, that to me is like the least worrisome thing about this is that what do we do if we run out of things that, beautifying the city. Look at all the things that you run across in certain states, at any rate, that were built by the Civilian Conservation Corps. They had the TVA in Tennessee and neighboring states. So, what is the solution to that? I think it's a job program. I think it's a situation where the government stands ready to hire anyone who can't find a job in the private sector. And notice something else about that. The private sector hires you because you meet their requirements. The public sector hires you because you need a job. And we're going to try to find something that fits your skill set. And if your skill set isn't up to par, then we're also going to train you. Now, how are we? Oh, by the way, if you do the math on this, it is extremely inexpensive. It is much cheaper to guarantee a job than to deal with things like the financial crisis. Much cheaper. And so we gain benefits, well above and beyond anything that's measured by GDP, which I know is an issue you also wanted to get into. Um, you know, Ironically, many estimates of how a job program would work would actually raise GDP, but who cares? GDP is just market transactions. And honestly, if we're going to deal with climate change, we need to get used to not having everything have to be a market transaction. I don't know how long I've had this cell phone. I don't need another one. I don't know how it works yet, right? I mean, it's just been probably 5 years, and yet the private sector people who make these things, they have a huge incentive to convince me that that's not any good anymore. And no offense to them, it's not a moral failing. That's the way the system works. They can't stay in business unless they convince people to buy more and more of these. We have to shift away from that. I I don't think we ever will. I think we're just going to screw ourselves royally. But I do feel like there are viable solutions out there, and the cornerstone of it is going to be the job guarantee. I don't think we'll ever do it, that's the position.
Well, so on that topic of GDP, the kind of the talking point that I've heard over and over again is that GDP going up has been associated with an increase in quality of life. Um, but as you've just described, there's a limit to the rate at which GDP will go up and the need for GDP to continue going up, and also the amount of quality of life improvement that would be caused by new additional GDP. So, um, eh, can you talk a little bit more about that notion of GDP historically being associated with an improvement in quality of life, but maybe it's not maybe it's not necessary, or it doesn't make sense to have those coupled together? And what would we replace GDP with?
Yeah. I think there is a correlation between GDP and happiness, if you will, that it reflects the fact that in government jobs are included in GDP. So it's not as if it's only private sector stuff. But So certainly there's an indirect relation, but there's also many things. For example, if we allow firms to create more pollution and then we have to hire firms to clean up the pollution, GDP goes up, right? So we have to be careful about that. I am not well versed in the literature about alternate measurements, but I know there's a huge one. One of my colleagues at TCU teaches a class on the economics of happiness, that there's a whole literature on, okay, but when are people actually happier? And how can we measure that? And I don't think there's anything perfect there. But I think that the job guarantee is an excellent example of something that would, okay, now it creates a political problem. I mentioned that we want the government focused on things that are social problems, but not necessarily profitable. Well, not necessarily profitable, we can figure out that we can try it. If it's not profitable, it's not profitable. But socially beneficial is a political question, as we can see right now, when many things are being shut down by the administration saying, well, these are not useful. And That creates a problem. But I mean, I don't know what the hell else we're going to do, A. And B, I mean, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, that created a lot of problems for which people did not have immediate answers. But they sat down and tried to work it out, and through trial and error, um, did so. And so, likewise, with a job guarantee, one of the things I didn't mention was that one of the things you want is for it to be locally sort of run. There'll be national programs, climate change certainly being at the top of that. But we can have a panel of business people and local civil leaders to say, what does our community need? Now, is that perfect? No, but neither is capitalism. I mean, as we have well seen. So we're not, what is that old saying? We shouldn't prevent the good because it's not perfect. That's not quite it. But, just because it's not perfect doesn't mean that's not the best route out of here.
Yeah.
So I haven't really answered your question because I don't know the literature very well, but I know that there are many people looking into how else can we measure how happy people are. And that should be our goal, and not higher GDP. Will higher GDP be part of that? I'm sure it will be, but it's not the whole thing. Yeah. Especially as we end up with these situations where you're talking about where AI and other technologies are replacing workers. It's like, is healthcare, is my healthcare really good? Oh, it absolutely is. I have a great service through the university. So does that mean it's great in the United States? Well, better than it used to be, but there were people what is it, the number two cause of bankruptcy? Medical bills. So medical bills are creating GDP. I don't know, I'm drifting off into just speculative territory. Let me pull myself back in and say, yes, you're right. GDP is not the only way to measure it. And there are a lot of people looking at it, but I'm not one of them, so I don't really know what it is. Yeah.
Well, I'd love to also ask you about, so you've talked about the kind of the role of the private sector, the role of government. What do you think about the role of individuals and maybe small businesses as well, but how can individuals and small businesses influence like prices and inflation, and what's their role in the macroeconomy?
Well, I think they're largely powerless in terms of accepting groups and through voting, of course, to affect policy. But let's say just um, oh, okay. Just recently with the bird flu, all right? So how can I affect that individually? Well, I can't really, but I can change my consumption patterns because again, it's so easy to look up. If people want to look up just these six letters, let's see, BLS space CPI. You're going to get Bureau of Labor Statistics, Consumer Price Index, and it will take you directly to the latest numbers, and it will show you by category. And you're like, wow. After COVID, I don't know if you remember, the price of used cars skyrocketed. So, how am I going to avoid this problem? Well, I'm going to try to stick with the car I've got for right now. Because the problem was, of course, that chips were reduced in supply. And this was making new cars very short in supply, which made the used cars very valuable. I'm a big computer gamer, and my computer died at the end of that first summer of COVID. And I got to have a good graphics card if I'm going to kill people online. So I had to spend like more than twice as much than on my last machine to get this because of the chip shortage. It was so you can detect where the prices are going up and down and try to avoid that. But to a large extent, you're helpless. Now the government can do something. One of the things that the Biden administration had done was this program to try to have us making chips in the U.S. again, so that wouldn't happen again. And that goes back to something I said earlier. Solutions to inflation tend to be long term. And so this was a long term solution. It was going to take a while to make this happen, but that was the only logical way to fix it. I mean, what else are you going to do during COVID when we can't get any chips? No.
Yeah. Well, so just to kind of summarize I wonder if you can talk about your thoughts on kind of the future frames of thinking for the macroeconomy and thinking about how we might change our thinking and how we frame ourselves and the businesses we work for within the macroeconomy.
Yeah, let me deal with that from a discipline perspective first, the discipline of economics, and then the individual. I don't know if you know Jamie Galbraith. He's a great economist at the University of Texas, and his father was John Kenneth Galbraith, who was a very, very famous economist in the 70s. Anyway, I was at one of Jamie's conferences down at University of Texas, and it was the part of the conference where everyone's drinking beer. Um, and I said to him, what do you think our chances are of saving the economics discipline? You know, of those of us who disagree and think we know the right way to do it, of getting in there and creating enough leverage to change the economics that even they themselves think is really bad, other than those few that are participating in it. And his answer was no, I don't think we can do it. I think that the discipline is gone. And that there's barriers to entry built up. They're pleasing themselves, and they have their jobs and they have their journals, and there's nothing. So what can we do? I said to him, and he said, well, stuff like this. And what he had done, his conference was with a bunch of policymakers. He had brought policymakers together to talk to them directly. So first thing, in terms of affecting economic policy and the discipline, I'm going to go with Jamie Galbraith's assumption that the discipline's dead. in terms of being a useful source of policy. But we can still reach out to our policymakers. Now, I was a political science major undergrad, but I don't know how the hell you do that. I really don't know how successful we can be, especially in a country that associates anything to do with the government with socialism without having any earthly idea what that even means. I don't know how we're going to pull that off. Maybe the disasters that are in our future right now will allow us to sort of come see things a bit more clearly. I don't know. Now, what about individuals? Um, well, with individuals, my first thought is to move, which I am seriously considering, by the way. I was born in the UK, so I have UK citizenship, so I can get the hell out. I don't know if things are a lot better there. But in terms of, you know, I, I guess right now, with the way things are right now, I would be trying not to spend a lot of money. I wouldn't be taking any risks. One of my daughters is a lawyer who does corporate finance stuff. So they got no business because nobody wants to do anything. They're all too scared of the uncertainty that's been created so far. Now, this is terrible. This is the right advice for an individual, but it's terrible for the economy to say, pull back, don't spend as much, and take care of yourself, which of course causes the entire economy to contract. And it means that those private sector jobs we've got are going to be fewer. And the way things are going, we're going to have fewer public sector jobs. I don't have a lot of good news for how individuals can deal with what's going on right now. I just don't. Yeah, take care of yourself first. So that's all I got.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you your candidness. I think that's actually a really real piece of advice, just to take care of yourself, your community, and your family. And I think that's maybe just the nature of the moment we're in, and then we can work towards figuring out what the long term looks like.
I, I don't
But
mean that to the extent, of course, that I don't care about those that are being directly affected by the things that are going on right now, but to the extent that I don't want to be taking a lot of risks right now. Okay, I wasn't born here and I'm leaving the country twice. I just left the country and came back in April, and then I'm going to leave again in June. And I'm honestly worried about when I come in and they check my cell phone, which they did not do when I came in from Italy last week. But I'm a citizen because my dad was in the Air Force. I was born in a British public hospital. I wasn't born on the base, so I wasn't a citizen until I was 17. But it was retroactive till when I was born. And I have the piece of paper when I had a lot more hair back then, by the way. And I looked up the law that made me a citizen, and I got to thinking, but not everyone cares about law right now in the current government. And so any leverage you can get to make John Harvey go back to England before he's ready to, I actually have been doing things differently because I feel like I'm vulnerable.
yeah,
And maybe I shouldn't be. Maybe I shouldn't be. Maybe I should be. Maybe the more people who don't do that, the better off we are. So anyway, just an addendum to the take care of yourself. But when you mentioned in your family and so forth, that might mean not taking care of yourself, and your community, and maybe taking some risks too. I don't know. I don't know what to do. I don't.
yeah, it's a lot to think about. But I really appreciate you taking the time to share your experience and your expertise in macroeconomics. So thank you. Really appreciate you taking the time.
I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you for asking me.